So, without further ado, that's sort of the logistics for the lunchtime breakouts, and then let me know on the outdoor offsite and the high ropes. I will welcome our panel, our innovation OGs. Thanks so much, folks.
So we are going to pivot a little bit in terms of topic. We have talked a lot today about a grand vision for America. We have talked about the money required to fuel this innovation, and we've talked about technology. And now we're going to talk about what I think Shift is really about, which is people. We are here to talk about real, true, authentic human stories, stories of joy, stories of triumph, stories of lots of suffering.
Primarily suffering.
Yes, primarily suffering. The OG innovation panel, going back really a decade to how this all began. And I'll tell you, I think what's at stake here is remembering that it is people. And I love John's presentation talking about some of the stories of the legends of the early generations going back to World War II. But I would recommend that story is also true for the last 10 years, where we have really been trying to terraform the department into an organization capable of being the customer that these innovative founders and investors needed to be. And I think that really happens at the ground floor, if you will. And the folks we have today were really those that lived it in the trenches with me, I'm proud to say. And we're going to do some storytelling with you about what those experiences were like. You have Will Treseder. He is one of the founders of BMNT. BMNT is, if this is an OG panel, that is the OG company that was in defense innovation for a decade. He's our SVP of Enterprise now. He also is a founder of the Marine Innovation Unit and a Marine reservist, and really, creating the newest innovation formation for the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is not the first, but they may one day be the best. Well, so, that's good.
Definitely the most enthusiastic.
Definitely lots of enthusiasm.
Definitely the cheapest, the one with the smallest budget.
Yeah, that's true. Very, very lean, very lean. And is in the Bay Area. We also have Ben Kohlmann. I give Ben credit. Ben was one of the people that turned me on to this whole world. I mean, really changed the trajectory of my career, putting a lot of these topics on the map. And he did that. We're going to talk a little bit about how he did that. It's a F-18 pilot by trade, and founder of an organization called the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, which we're going to talk about. Spent some time at McKinsey, founded a bunch of companies, and now is a defense investor out of Dallas. He introduced me to Josh Steinman. Josh, I met when he was a lieutenant in the Navy with the CRICs, Rapid Innovation Cell. Any other CRICsters in the house?
There's at least one.
There's at least one.
Rich Walsh. What's up, buddy?
Got it. So he was in the CRIC, truly like a cyber genius. Did that work in the Navy, ends up for all 4 years the National Security Council, assistant to the president, working on cyber policy. Now the founder of Galvanic, and he'll tell you a bit about his company and what he's trying to do to secure our infrastructure. And then we have my friend Lauren. Lauren and I met when she was in the DIUX, before they dropped the X, and she made a contribution that I guarantee many of the entrepreneurs and investors in this room benefited directly from her brainchild, the commercial services opening. We're going to talk to her about her experience with that. She then went to another OG defense innovation company, Second Front, where she was the first chief operating officer, and now she is at Deloitte, where she leads the defense innovation practice area for them. So credit to Mike, really could not have put together a better lineup. And with that, we're going to get right into it. We're going to start with a speed round, keep things very snappy, but I want to ask each of you to talk about what brought you into this in the first place? I mean, now defense innovation is a hashtag, but back into the 2014-15 era, like, you guys were truly heretics and renegades. It took a lot of courage. Anyone would have told you at the time you were nuts. What is it about you that made you want to even be in this game way back then? Give me a couple bullets from each. We can start with Will and come down the line.
So I had two formative experiences, and then I had sort of the knockout blow. So for me, my first experience was, if any of you ever heard of the Expeditionary Energy Office, this was an office the Marine Corps stood up back in like 2008. And I was part of the unit that was a guinea pig testing out a bunch of renewable energies and rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. We had solar panels deployed at patrol bases, stuff like that. So for my last deployment, very forward deployed, and I got the chance to see how much of a difference these technologies made in terms of more tooth, less tail, dramatically cut the number of resupply convoys, which was one of our main kind of vulnerabilities in Afghanistan at that time. So we had a lot fewer casualties than we otherwise would have as a warfighting organization. Then I came back, and within 6 months, I was working at Singularity University, which is a Google NASA-backed incubator. This is like 2009, 10, with pretty revolutionary stuff focused on exponentially changing technologies. So that was kind of the two pieces that I thought was really interesting. I kept reflecting on all these amazing technologies that were coming out, and then how nascent they were, but how important they were from a warfighting organization. As like a sergeant of the guard in Afghanistan, I had to, because we were using renewable energy technologies, we didn't have the same level of energy as we did for a lot of normal bases where you had a diesel generator burning JP8. And so for the way it changes behavior, for example, I had to make a trade-off between, do I let my Marines power their laptops so they can watch porn at night, or do I get to turn on the heat in Afghanistan in January in the mountains? So obviously I chose the laptops for morale, but like that's an example of like actual trade-offs that you have to face when you're experimenting with these technologies. And so that kind of woke me up. And then I met Joe Felter and Pete Newell, with co-founders at BMNT. And after that, it was just like this super high trust, like, why wouldn't I work with these people? They're amazing, and I respect the hell out of
It's
them.
not a use case for renewable energy that shows up in very many pitch decks, but maybe it needs to.
Enlisted Marine Corps will find a way.
Yes, that's incredible. Ben, over to you.
So I think I was first red-pilled in 2004 when I did an independent study with my ROTC committee officer on the works of a gentleman named John Boyd. And there was a particular quote that stuck in my mind then and really formed the foundation for a lot of the early innovation movements. And it was that machines don't win wars. Men and women do, and they use their minds to do so. And so as I deployed to Afghanistan 5 years later and saw what was happening on the ground, and I got back in 2010, I was just convicted that the most powerful military in the world, with the biggest budget and the best technology, was flat out losing. And something had to be done. It was not worth me sitting still and going through the promotion path. I was willing to put my career in the line to stand up for what I stood for. I think we'll get into it, but that really motivated me to kind of throw caution to the wind and build something around people that would motivate the DoD to recognize that we had lost 2 wars in a row and had to do something different.
Yeah, building around people. I love that. Josh?
Yeah, so very similar to Ben, I had been involved in the counterterrorism world in academia since before 9/11, and had gotten recruited into some interesting places in the Navy, deployed twice to Iraq, including the second time where I was one of just like 50 people left. It was the casing ceremony, casing meaning the end of a campaign, casing ceremony for Operation Iraqi Freedom in the room, war's over, everybody go home. And I had been one of these people that from a very early age, like my entire professional academic upbringing was about going to this region and winning these wars. And it was incredibly dispiriting. And I got back, and when I'd been forward, I'd run operational teams outside the wire and had always been very forward-leaning with regards to utilization of technology. And I guess I'd built myself a reputation for that. And I think the joke is that Ben gave me my last job in the Navy, and then I gave him his first job out of the Navy. So Ben comes to me in the middle of the night and is like, hey, we're putting together a team of heretics to go out and do the things that the department ought to be doing and should have been doing for many years, and show them how to get things done. And this we have done.
Maureen?
So my background is in acquisition, and prior to coming to DIUX, I spent about 6 years in the Pentagon working in Army Acquisition Headquarters and worked on various acquisition reform efforts there, right, where some of our biggest successes were things like removing a reporting requirement, right, which was great, but doesn't really, transform the acquisition ecosystem. And so in 2015, when Secretary Carter announced the creation of DIUX, I raised my hand to go interview for the acquisition lead job there and got that. And got to DIUX and, saw what was going on there and really felt very, like your word, convicted, right? That for our bigger strategic competition with China as a country, that DoD had to fundamentally change the way that they did business and how they interacted with the Valley as a customer. And that was the start of our journey.
Let's jump in on the start of the journey. So OTAs existed for decades.
Yep.
OTAs figured in the background of like some of the stories we heard today about big victories, but they were not widely used in DoD. And when they were widely used, it led to disasters like Future Combat Systems. So tell me about, what is a CSO? Why did you create it? And what is the lesson there in terms of like, you needed a CSO to start using OTAs, and once you figured that out, right, like then they became the new hotness. So how did you come up with a CSO? What is a CSO? What's the story?
Absolutely. So I got out to DIUX, and for the first 6 months or so that I was there, our mission was go talk to cool companies, find great technologies, connect them back with DoD customers, and magic's going to happen, and they're going to buy them, right? And as we all know, that's not quite how that process works. Not that easy. And so as the acquisition lead, they turned to me and said, hey, we really have to figure out a way to get money into the hands of these companies. Sorry, I just saw David, my co-partner in crime, a lot of this. And said, hey, we have to find a better way to get money in the hands of these companies really quickly, right? We need to design fundamentally a different business process that makes the DoD a more attractive customer, not only to these companies, but to their investors as well, right? So these investors will see a path to market, a path to revenue, right? And so we kind of had three fundamental tenets in mind when we thought about this. It had to be a process that was fast, right? We had to move money quickly. It couldn't be 12, 24, 36-month timelines to get on contract. Flexible, right? We wanted to have flexible terms that were more negotiable, that seemed more commercial in the way that DoD typically does business. And fundamentally, I think most importantly, collaborative, right? We wanted to get the engineers from these companies who knew these problems best in the same room as the warfighters who knew the problems best. Like, instead of drafting this long requirements document outside and not talking to the companies, let's just get everybody in the same room and allow them to talk and design these projects together. And then fundamentally to be able to move directly from this kind of prototype early project all the way through production without having to go through another competition. So OTAs could have done most of this prior to 2015. In 2015, they added on this new flexible authority to move directly to production. And so we said, great, OTAs are great, but we have to fundamentally use them differently than DoD has done in the past. We have to make them more commercial and make an easier path to market for commercial companies and investors.
And then the rest is history.
Yep, we did about $200 million, I think, through the CSO in the first 2 years and did the first production OTs in DoD.
And now there's been, I think, 50, right?
At least. It's growing rapidly.
It's amazing. Let me turn to you, Ben, and probe a little bit into DEF. So DEF had its first summit since COVID last week, and there were a lot of people talking about the impact of the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum as a kind of grassroots network of innovators, and I think it's really relevant for this group. A real overlap, I think, in spirit of the Defense Ventures Fellows. But a lot of people don't realize is that before it was DEF, it was actually disruptive thinkers. And it started with an article. And I want a little bit of tell us about what did you say in this article and what was the reaction that you got from the brass? And how did that turn into an organization that lived for a decade?
Totally. So Josh posted the article last night on Twitter, and I went and reread it, and I was horrified at how terrible it reads 10 years later. But it really launched a lot of conversation. And the genesis was, I had gotten back from Afghanistan in 2010, got assigned to work with the Marine Corps in 2011.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I know, it was rough. Marine maintenance is pretty bad, honestly.
They made him eat crap.
But in the course of that, one of our young enlisted sailors got drunk in San Diego. And so the commanding officer in 06 on the base had a lockdown and said, no matter what your rank or age, if you want to go out for a beer on Friday night, you have to ask for permission from the next person in your chain of command. And to me, this was absurd. I literally 6 months before, I'd been in Afghanistan flying a $75 million jet with life and death decisions, dropping weapons on troops that were attacking our own folks. And I remember walking around Balboa Park just fuming, went to my apartment, which was right next door, and for 45 minutes just wrote this screed about the military needs more disruptive thinkers and innovative thinking. Shot it off to this small journal called Small Wars Journal. I knew the editor at the time, and within 24 hours of publication, it had become the most read article in Small Wars Journal history. And all of a sudden, I got all this inbound and hatred and, honestly, positive responses from very senior people. 2, 3, 4-star generals and admirals. There was a group called the Warlord Loop, which blew up. How could this young junior officer who knows nothing criticize this large institution? And I had to kind of walk into my commanding officer's office, tail between my legs, and say, hey, sir, I wrote an article and everybody's talking about it. And he actually hadn't read it and didn't know anything about it. But I had to kind of come to Jesus about that. But from that, we built a small group, 5 people, a couple entrepreneurs who were in the civilian sector, a couple of military folks to start a book club. And we started thinking about the works of John Boyd and Benoit Mandelbrot and Nassim Nicholas Taleb, just to like think differently. And it caught fire in San Diego. It caught fire across the country. And when I noticed that there were all these lone wolf innovators who felt like they couldn't speak out in their units, what they needed was a convening force to bring them together. So DEF grew, and then there were all these other junior officers who were writing articles, who were sticking their head above the ground. I recruited them to be a board of directors of a group that became the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. And the idea was simple, is that what's in your people's minds should matter more than what's on their chest in terms of the medals and what's on their collar in terms of rank. And so we brought them together in Chicago. This was 2013, in the middle of a government shutdown. And I knew we had captured some sort of product market fit when junior officers were taking PTO and paying their own way to come to a conference in the middle of the country. And from there, it really launched a bunch of networks that then created a lot of the innovation organizations we see across the DoD.
And what I really hear in that story is we're talking about movement building and organizing. And I think that that's a really important part of the innovation story going all the way back. Another organization that was fit a similar mold, happened at the same time that both Josh, you and Ben were involved in, was the CRIC. I think one of the things really interesting about the CRIC is that it was shut down, and why. And so, Joshua, would you tell us a little bit about your experience, trying to drive real, meaningful disruption in cyber in the Navy? What it went like to be lieutenant, now reporting to the CNO, and like why that was just ultimately rejected.
So Ben told half the story about his article. The other half was that the senior officer in the Navy, the chief of naval operations, called him into his office, unheard of, literally unheard of, and essentially gave Ben the remit to work with a very powerful 2-star at the time. I think, did he get promoted to 3? Did draft 8? Yeah. And pulled together 10 heretics, gave us essentially a blank check, said, go find asymmetric opportunities for the United States Navy. Ben was our ringleader, so he should be giving this response. But essentially, there were 10, 12 of us at any given time over the course of 2.5 years, including Rich out here in the audience, and others. And it was incredibly enlightening because it was a kind of a think-do tank. So we had ideas, and then we would propose solutions and then go execute them. So Ben put the first 3D printer on an aircraft carrier in 2013, 2014. The process for that was very nimble. Quarterly we would walk to the E-ring in the Pentagon, bunch of lieutenants and E3s, E4s, E5s, and sit down with the CNO and be like, hey, we think we should do X. And be like, what's the cost? This is the cost. Okay, go forth and do. And then, like manna from heaven, orders would flow. I was working on an augmented reality project for warfighters that we demonstrated on the bridge of a Navy ship. Rich was working on predictive maintenance back in 2013. We had someone working on unmanned underwater vehicles. Another project that I wrote was a white paper for the Joint Chiefs saying, hey, we should open an embassy in Silicon Valley. That paper was accepted by the Secretary of Defense and authorized.
Secretary of Defense decided it was his idea, not your idea.
That's fine.
I'm glad that's getting out today.
Yeah.
I
I wrote the paper, briefed it to CNO. He took it to the other Joint Chiefs, and they took it to the SecDef. I resigned in the meantime. I was like, this thing isn't happening. And then on my last week on active duty, I got a phone call saying like, hey, it's going to happen. Maybe you should think about being a reservist. And
if I can add about the CNO meetings, what's interesting is 10 years ago, you had junior officers who was telling the CNO about things that are now being funded.
Literally now.
We are proud investors in Saronic, which is an unmanned surface vehicle organization that's doing great things for the U.S. Navy. But 10 years ago, there was a junior officer named Lieutenant J.G. Ian Crone who said to the Chief of Naval Operations, who was a submariner, sir, I can get rid of all your submarines and do everything with autonomous vehicles. And he had the whole brief, he had the whole concept of operations, there was disbelief amongst the other admirals there. Same thing with 3D printing, which now became a huge logistics thing, all the cyber stuff we did. Junior officers have great vision, we were given the opportunity to present these future-looking components that are now coming to reality.
We got into
was
that
the power of the group.
We got into that screaming match with the Pac Fleet commander when we were like, we don't think you're going to have aircraft carriers in a conflict with China. 2014.
Yeah.
Like 4-star just yelling at a bunch of
The future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. And if you don't have a pathway to listen to those dissident voices, then all of that knowledge gets lost. I want to
just real quick. Here's I think the lesson that Ben's trying to draw out. None of this worked without buy-in from very, very senior people. And this is a lesson that people have drawn out in that book on Intel and the Harvard Business School professor that passed away, Clay Christensen. Like, that's how we were able to do things, was with that partnership with very senior people.
Clayton Christensen, absolutely. So I want to pull that thread and bring it to you, Ella. One of the things I think we are all talking about is how the department really can't figure out how to aggregate and curate all of its own knowledge and insight. And I think one of the functions that BM&T has performed is being able, as an outside consultant, to see the forest for the trees. And you guys really, I think, are the best in the world at what you call problem curation. So I think about your decade there, you've seen all of the department's problem statements, you've worked on all the hacking for defense cases. I mean, you have this kind of perspicacity that comes from a little bit of remove. And I wonder, like, what are the things that you have observed of the patterns of the department's problems over the last decade?
A depressing lack of change, I think, would be one thing. The trend line is not dramatic. Probably the thing that I think I would emphasize the most is in hacking for defense, we've run over 1,000 problems through the platform, and there have been 2 that haven't changed substantively throughout the course. So I think that's something that's really interesting. A lot of people don't take for granted. So 0.2%, give or take, probably a little bit lower than that. Our problems are you could think of that as broadly saying this problem was accurately described, meaning 99.8 of these problems are not accurately described. As soon as you start talking to end users, contracting officers, program managers, mission commanders, it turns out it's completely different than what you thought, or at least it's meaningfully different than what you thought. But we don't have that process, that sort of QA, QC, the quality assurance, quality control kind of filter up front to say this is actually correct. Just because it made it through it's a JUONS or it made it through some requirements process doesn't mean that it's actually a problem. It just means it's made it through that process. That's every system is perfectly designed to create what it creates, right? A requirement is not a problem, right? And if you go out and talk to people and they say that's not my problem, well, that's the starting point, right? And this is really based in Pete, co-founder of our CEO's insight when he ran the Army's Rapid Equipping Force, which is an early DIU version. It was only commercial tech to the battlefield. It had all these rapid acquisitions authorities and everything, and a pretty big budget. That he realized a conversation about the actual operational problem never started until the first version of the solution was fielded. So everything up to that point was not a real conversation about the problem. It was just give me something. And as soon as that something exists, now I start learning about what the actual problem is. And so that became the insight that led to problem curation as its own discipline is we need to find some way to start to gather, using a lot of stuff you might know from design thinking or some other basic tools, human factors, and a couple other things. Anthropology, there's basic research into how humans do things. And you can tease out some basics that help you kind of broadly frame something and then provide opportunities to test those assumptions about how well do we actually understand this problem.
The radical idea of talking to users. The department is hermetically seals its users apart from suppliers.
One example that was not a hacking for defense one, but at ARL we were working with this team, shall remain nameless, working on tech, shall remain nameless. But the core idea was like this: they were going to build this little power plant that they were going to put on a soldier, and we could not get them off the X. We just could not get them to stop thinking about this idea. So we just basically rounded up a bunch of soldiers, a bunch of infantry guys, and we were like, "Come here and explain your idea." These guys were like, "You're fucking crazy. You're going to put a bomb on my fucking hip?" And then that's so that they go like, oh crap, what are we going to do, right? But then this Camp Commandant, who was a part of the group, said, well, actually, what you've done is potentially you've developed a tactical generator. If you focus on making it bigger, and so it generates enough to patrol, to power patrol base, maybe doesn't make any noise, you're not burning JP8. That's kind of interesting. So they basically took the same amount of money and repurposed it into a whole different direction for the set of technologies. So they're trying to build a different product based on insights from users, and that was like for them, it was absolutely huge. For us, we were just sort of waiting for the epiphany.
For the insight for the audience here is figuring out how to get the department to cough up actual users is as valuable as a first contract.
Absolutely.
But also there's this question of empathy that I think and I've tweeted about this, so this may be a repeat for folks who have seen that, but you have to have empathy because everything that we're doing here in this room and in this larger movement is about lethality. It's about 18-year-olds that are going outside the wire, that are in contact. That's a term of art. Look it up if you don't know what it means, please. That are in contact with the enemy. And the point is that you have to have empathy for the people, or they're dropping bombs. You have to have empathy, and you have to understand that. And so,
Not like wrapping bombs. You're not like dropping bombs.
actually dropping bombs, hitting the actual button.
Real bombs.
Real bombs. Real bombs. And the point is, I think, and I've seen this with folks that I'm friends with now, where a lot of people who maybe don't have that background are deeply desirous to like get involved, and they come up with an idea, and like Will was saying, they don't get off that idea. And the point is, it's not about you, okay? It's about kids that might die.
I want to add one more thing that's going to be a little bit more, because I can't compete with the empathy and 100% agree with that. But on the business side of that, right, because you're talking about some of the problems that DoD faces, is that fundamentally DoD for so long has been a monopsony, right? Like the single buyer of things like missiles, aircraft carriers, tanks, right? So they've set up their entire acquisition and funding processes from this perspective of someone who holds all of the buying power in these relationships, right, with the defense industrial base, because you know, those companies will jump through any hoops or red tape or whatever the department throws at them to get that funding because they are the only buyer. But when you look at what we often call, right, the non-traditional tech base, right, the Silicon Valley, the investors, their DoD's not only not the single buyer, but they're often not even an important minority buyer, right? There's so much of a better path to market from commercial customers. But yet DoD will still approach those business relationships from the perspective of a monopsonist, right? Like, oh, of course you should want to do business with me. Of course you should want to sell to me. Of course you should, you know, wait a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is for revenue on that, right? And so until you fundamentally shift that mindset of, hey, you're facing a different industrial base with different needs, and you have a very different place in that market than you typically do, only once you kind of make that cultural and mindset shift can you start to think about, okay, how can I change my business relationships and the way that I do business to attract these types of companies?
I love that you brought that up because it points to how the relationship between DoD and the industrial base has evolved because of the shift in where R&D funding is coming from, because of the emergence of dual use. You know, today, I think it's pretty remarkable that we have someone like Catherine Boyle on stage delivering such an inspirational set of remarks about how Silicon Valley is going to save America. I remember a time, and I say this as a Googler, I remember a time when it was a very different relationship. And the idea of putting an embassy and an outpost in Silicon Valley was not like being posted in London, right? That was like a very different kind of dynamic for where that embassy would be. And you lived that, right, in the early days. But then you went to Second Front, and you were there in 2018, 2019, and that's when Maven happened. And so what I wanted to ask you, Lauren, is like talk a bit about what the climate was like between the founders, the investors, the engineers, the department in the early days, and how is that different today? How have you seen that evolve?
So I think it comes down to perceptions about return on investment, right? So from like 2015 to 2018, when I was at DIUX, there was a lot of, okay, we're interested, like show me the money, right? Demonstrate that you can actually put your money where your mouth is and deliver funding to companies and to investors. And we did that. And so in 2018, when I was in Second Front, we were starting to get to this area of, I'll call maybe cautious optimism or cautious curiosity, right? So, okay, we've seen the department is willing to do some funding, but can that translate into like true tail end funding, right? Not just these small prototypes.
Defense curious.
Exactly, defense curious, very defense curious, exactly. And I think since that time, we've started to kind of see that upward trend, right? Like the department has shown more of a demand signal, and not just a demand signal, but a realistic path to market for some of these non-traditional companies. And I think those companies and those investors are starting to more respond to that and have been starting to respond to that for the past 5 years. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be yet, like don't get me wrong. But I've seen that steady uptick over the last 10 years, and I'm encouraged that we'll continue to go in that direction.
Yeah. I think interestingly, I think the invasion of Ukraine, more than anything else, has driven an alignment and really put some of the qualms from the 2018 era behind us. Because now no one can claim that we're on our path to some techno-utopian, post-Westphalian, cryptocurrency universe where we don't need states. Like nation state warfare is not going anywhere. And I think that's helped engineers see the role they play in a new form of sort of civic tech, responsible tech.
And I would add to that, right, and then I'll get off the stage metaphorically. The China question, to me, that was there in 2015. It's even more present now, right? If we take as a given that the future of warfighting, of technology is going to come from these non-traditional places like Silicon Valley, China is very heavily bought into that idea and acting on it in a much more active way than the US is, at least officially, right? So I think that is all of our collective kind of call to arms. How can we help continue to break down those barriers, leverage our own, national industrial base that we have in a better way than China is?
That's great. I want to, we only have so much time left. I want to ask you guys some questions about your experience. And I think one of the things that I've observed, and that I think all the Defense Ventures Fellows has observed, is that it just takes so much more grit and determination to survive these periods of change. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that experience. And this is a little raw and a little personal, but I feel like we're all friends. We can go there. Like, what was the worst thing that happened to you in this journey of, trying to get the department to change its behaviors? And how did you cope with it? How did you overcome it?
I can go first. This actually ties to the previous question you asked Josh about why did the CRIC die? So I was working for a 4-star admiral, and there was a chief of staff who I was working with closely, who now is a very senior officer. And he went to Enfosis, which is the convening of all Navy flag officers. For the first time, a junior officer in the CRIC was allowed to speak. And he was talking about revolutionizing cyber. This 06 at the time, I rode back to Norfolk with, was just incensed that a junior officer had the voice. This individual ended up working for the Chief of Naval Operations, the future Chief of Naval Operations, and behind the scenes basically killed the CRIC because he didn't like junior officers having a voice. When Congress asked for the CNO's budget request, they noticed that there was no funding for this organization. The senior leaders didn't respond. Congress said, okay, let's move forward, and asked about it. And a year later, the CRIC died. And at that moment, I knew that we had done everything wrong because we were the junior officers who were getting on newspapers, and we were getting big funding announcements and doing cool things, but we hadn't built the networks inside the DoD and inside Congress to drive change. And actually, this was a deep lesson that I've taken now in the venture capital world, where B2G muscle is very different than B2C. Startups, the best technology doesn't win in DoD. One of the first things I look at now in due diligence is how strong is your lobbying arm? How strong is your relationships on the Hill? How strong are your relationships in the building with the right people who can get you to program a record? And it's all about this relationship. This is why Anduril is winning. That's why Shield AI is winning. That's why all these companies are winning, because they've actually built the connective tissue such that if one or two individuals don't like them, if and when they leave, they still have the resiliency there. It's more the technology, it's the networks of people. And that was a really hard lesson, because this baby that I had created that I thought was making change, in a heartbeat was killed by the bureaucracy. But fortunately, it's led to a learning that I've been able to apply right now.
The Hydra's head.
Yes.
I also appreciate what you're saying in there, but the antidote to that problem is in fact community.
Yes.
And when I think about a lot of the competition that is inherent in the market, we think about a lot of these entrants as competing for a very small sliver of a very big DoD pie, right? Because 1 or 2% of the acquisition budget is going to venture back new entrants. And so it would be easy to believe that these investors and these companies were competing against each other. But I think your point is the opposite, which is what we're competing against is inertia. And the goal for them is not to hunt alone, but to hunt in a pack and grow the size of the pie. And they do that right in concert with each other. Right. So,
well, to that point, they killed the CRIC, but the people that were in the CRIC spun off to build the Naval Innovation Network, all the things in the Air Force. AFWERX was a direct spin out of what the CRIC had started. It was the people that you couldn't kill. You can destroy a building, you can't destroy the movement. All those spin-offs are the things that we're seeing right now. The technology wasn't important. It was the individuals who stuck together and built something meaningful through those connections. And all these people here right now, with Mike's building, what you've built, Josh, that is the fruit of people coming together and driving forward on the mission. And you can't beat that. No bureaucracy can.
And this comes back to Boyd, right? Because what did Boyd say?
Be versus do. Or you got to say something.
People, ideas, technology.
In that order.
Oh, yeah. Different one.
A lot of good quotes.
To be versus to do, of course.
Yeah.
Amazing. How about for you, Will?
I forgot the question. Did you guys get kind of?
What was the worst thing
I was doing like a blue face paint on Ben for a minute, and he was doing, I don't know, whatever. You guys
stood up.
You guys don't get it.
They'll
All right.
never take our.
I just want to pick up on the community theme, I guess. I'll just close out there. So like I was just reflecting on this because it happens often. There are four panels here. There's BMNTers on 3 of them. So I think it is. I see the community. The longer you're in this game, the more you realize that this is all about. It's an infinite game. There's relationships, and that's the way you have to play it. I was also reminded of this in my reserve unit, the Marine Innovation Unit, that just got stood up at Stanford's inaugural National Security Conference, which happened a couple of weeks ago, which was really cool. I counted 6 MIUers out of 400 people, which just speaks to some of the saturation that happens, because that was primarily a student thing, even though I had a ton of VCs and a bunch of other great senior former government leaders. It was just very interesting to see these movements, and I see each of those people as potential founders. That's how I evaluate them. So it's kind of how I see these people. It's like, oh, this person could be germinating and eventually be sprouting, and maybe again, with the 10-year time horizon, I think maybe they're 5-7 years away. It doesn't matter, but they can be somebody who builds or joins an early team of something that becomes truly disruptive and much needed.
Let me pull that thread with you a little bit. So you are exposed to a lot of entrepreneurs in the BMNT space, but as the Chief Strategy Officer for the Marine Innovation Unit, you just mentioned MIU, you are a classic intrapreneur. And each of you up here has been an entrepreneur and in some cases an entrepreneur as well. What are the lessons that you learned from this experience you described that you're bringing to standing up MIU?
The thing that comes to my head is Warren Buffett's response to how to make money, which is rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, seed rule number 1. Rule number 1 is have a senior champion. Rule number 2 is seed rule number 1. I just think that's fun. Whenever you look at John Cotter's Leading Change, which is the main commercial version of this, it's the Bible, the 10 rules, but it all starts with number 1. And it's not you go, well, if I don't have 1, I can just go 2 through 10. It's no, if you don't have 1, you don't pass go. You don't collect $200. You don't have a senior champion. I just think that's it. MIU's founder, CEO, who just transitioned out, change of command, he was direct line to the commandant. Commandant knew who he was, assistant commandant knew who he was, head of CD&I knew who he was, head of CDD, head of Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. He had those relationships that was critical, otherwise it wouldn't have gotten off the ground.
Do we have enough senior champions?
We're growing them.
We're growing them.
Well, that was also my vision for DEF, was these 03s and 04s in 2012, as they stayed in, we go to war, they're 06s and 07s, because of that relation they built. Now they're doing relationships, bringing in fires, having Pentagon conversations. I think to Josh's point, we are trying to grow them. And I think we have senior leaders who are starting to get it, and there's still work to be done.
One of the things that really affected my thinking about defense innovation was when I was working on the Force of the Future Task Force for Secretary Carter, and I had this realization that there's no lateral hiring in DoD. There are no infusions of new leaders or the new ideas they come in the military ranks at all. You recruit people at the beginning of their careers, and then you attrit them until you are left with a very small group of 4-stars who are representing less than 1/1000th of 1% of the intake of the funnel of the 2 million people that put on the uniform. So that means that all of your future senior leaders are today's junior officers. And you will simply never get another chance to bring in new thinking or new innovators or new creativity or new anything. You just whittle down from what you start with, and then you're left with what you're left with.
I was shortlisted for Commandant.
You were shortlisted for Commandant. I would love you to be Commandant. I think it'd be great.
Scary thought, but yeah.
But I think that's a strategic case statement for Defense Ventures, which is, what is the experience that you want those junior and mid-grade officers to have, so that, chances are a few of them are going to be 3 and 4 stars. One of them could be chairman. Wouldn't you want them to be exposed to these ideas? And if you're an investor, all of your companies could only hope to one day have as a customer someone who had this background. And if you aren't lucky to have that, good luck. No one's buying anything without a senior champion over their shoulder saying it's okay to do.
So the way that I've come to think about this is my experience in the reserves is that this is the wrong phrase, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's a non-binary thing. It's there needs, instead of a 1-0, there needs to be a qubit super state of there's like a commercial and defense orientation. MIU is in it's in a super state. Every MIUer is like, except the activated LMOs, but even them have like really interesting commercial backgrounds. 300 Marines, and they all have extensive commercial backgrounds, startup experience, family offices, venture finance, whatever. And they're combining that, so they're forcing this weird insight into the Marine Corps with like a Marpat skin on the top of it, so it's acceptable to the Marine Corps. They're like, oh, okay, well, you're a Marine, you don't look like a fat piece of shit, but like, so I listen to you. That's actually something that the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps said to us in our inaugural unit. He said like, oh, that's interesting. You're not a bunch of fat weirdos.
So you also told me your highest paid individual on the outside, 800K, is a Lance Corporal.
Yeah.
Like, that just blows the mind of a 4-star.
Yeah.
When a super talented coder is an E3. Like, what?
It doesn't make
like, but that's the power of the people.
Celebrate that shit. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
We're taking over. Enlisted, taking over. Yeah, that's right. Not really. Don't. No, sorry. No, don't court martial me.
Speed round. Close us out. I'm going to borrow a few minutes from the next person. I'm getting the nod from the boss, and it's great to do. So I want to make sure that we are using this opportunity to pass on the lessons from you guys that were there at the ground floor, because I really believe that it is the people in this room who are going to go on to be the champions. So from all of your decade of experience, your hard-fought lessons learned, like, what is the one thing you want to pass on to these women and men to help them take the baton from you and do another decade of this marathon?
I'll start. It's acknowledge the people who put in the work. And to that point, having built these efforts, I want to give a huge round of applause to Mike. Like, bringing this together, it's simply phenomenal. Like, this right here is what I wish Steph could have been. Mike saw the vision and did it the right way. So, Mike, well done, Mike.
Kudos, brother.
I'll go next. There's an amazing book by a guy named Elting Morrison called Men, Machine, and Modern Times. Old
Brilliant.
School. You must read it. You must read it. You must read it. He was academic at MIT 60, 70 years ago, or 50, 60 years ago. And the book covers vignettes of defense innovation from like the 1880s, 1890s, and then further on. Or you can listen to Dan Carlin's interview with Elon Musk on Hardcore History about the engineering of the P-51 Mustang in the Second World War. And what I would offer to folks in this auditorium is that, you know, these are problems that are human problems that Ben, you know, and all of us have been talking about here on the stage, but they're not new problems. And the point is that the solutions to many of these challenges exist in history. So read broadly, and we've all got reading lists we can give you.
So many. I'm gonna let you close out, Lawrence. I'll go quickly. So just to build off Ben's point, concept of Chesterton's fence. If you're not familiar with this, G.K. Chesterton, British like theologian and philosopher, basically said if you're walking around and you come across a fence, like, and you want to get somewhere, don't dismantle the fence until you know why somebody put it there. So it's kind of building off your point. So whatever knowing about the history of like this specific local innovation, the global history of innovation, really interesting, but also the history of what preceded the thing that you're trying to dismantle. So that's like working with primes and program offices and understanding why do they respond to the incentives they do. And they haven't made big steps and improvements and changes. Just read the latest geo reports and stuff. And so who's doing that work and why? And having a sense of empathy and curiosity about where they're coming from is super helpful, because it doesn't feel like you're coming in trying to just poke at them. Instead, you're on the same side of the table. This is like, you know, been married for 10 years now. Like, you know, you're on the same side of the table and you're solving the problems on the other side of the table. You're here, you know, you and the prime or the whoever, right? Problems over there, you're here, we're on a team. Like that really helps. That framing really helps. Actually, physically, we'll sit on the same side. Even in like a conference room with 2 people, half the table, I'll be right next to you.
Kind of weird.
The same. It works.
Lauren, take us to sound.
Lean
So-
a little close like this.
I think I zeroed in on one of the words used in particular, which was incentives, right? So we're all here because we care about DoD, we care about the mission sets, but it's also about the incentives to do business between DoD and companies and the investors behind them, right? So how can we change the incentives and the business processes of the department to enable these companies, these investors, to do business with them? Because if we don't change that, then we're just going to be continuing to wish for that, right? Because we all really care about the mission. But we have to change the way that we do business to make that impactful.
Amen.
Absolutely. I am glad that we already gave Mike a rousing ovation, because I was going to do that to close this out.
Sorry, Josh.
He really deserves it. Even better that it happened spontaneously and authentically. But I just want to close by observing something I want to make sure everyone appreciates. Raise your hand if you're an investor. A list of investors has showed up for this. I think this is the largest gathering of venture capital in the history of Washington, D.C.
It's true.
I have never seen this many investors, this many companies come together for something. And the fact that they came together for people and not profit, right? For fellows having life-changing, career-altering experiences and being part of that, that is a real tribute to what Catherine said at the outset about what is different and special and important and unique about this country. And I just want to affirm how much it means to me that Mike has devoted years of his life to bringing all of us together for conversations like this one that is not just about businesses and it's not just about technology and it's not even just about kicking ass, right, on the battlefield. It's really about appreciating that this doesn't work without us taking care of each other. And defense ventures taking care of each other is important. And that, I think, is, this incredible panel of people that have done so much for this country. That's, I think, the message for you is like, you're a part of this community. We believe in you. We are grateful for you. We know how hard it is to be on the road you're on, but thank you for doing it. And we are here to support you, and Shift is here to support you. Thank you for being here.
Well done, Mike.